busy is the worst four-letter word in the English language, right? Because we use it as a status symbol. What have you been up to lately, Danny? Oh, yeah, I'm just so busy right now, right? And it's like, as soon as I say that, what I'm really saying is, my life's out of control. Everyone else's emergency has now become my emergency. That's why I'm so busy, because my calendar is full and my hands are moving all the time, but I'm not focused on anything.
Joshua, thank you for coming on the podcast. Longtime fan of your work. Really appreciate what you've done and really excited to dive into your story and some unfamiliar topics that you don't normally go on podcasts. So thank you for being here and excited to do this today.
Oh, thanks so much, brother. Appreciate you having me.
So I'm going to list off some accomplishments and you hopefully won't get too attached to them, but just so give some context for the audience. 360 plus podcast episodes, 10 national book tours, 4 best-selling books, 2 Netflix documentaries, 1 Emmy nomination, hundreds of millions of downloads, tens of millions of readers, millions of followers on social media, thousands of writing students, and also 0 advertisements. That is you and Ryan, and that's pretty incredible. But yeah, just wanted to give some context for the Minimalists and all the great things you guys have done. I'm curious, how does that sound like when I read that back out to you?
Yeah, I don't know. I think you said it really well. Those things are all fine, and they don't make me happy. I'm not attached to them. They are a byproduct of doing something meaningful. When Ryan and I started the Minimalists, man, a dozen years ago, back in 2010, we were sort of living the corporate dream and started letting go of some of the excess stuff, but it's easy to pick up other attachments along the way, right? And so, I'm going to be, I was successful in the corporate world. That didn't make me happy. Maybe a different kind of success will make me happy. And then it becomes this other kind of sort of accomplishment consumerism in a way. And I want to avoid that. I don't think there's anything wrong with those things. Being nominated for an Emmy or having a New York Times best-selling book or something like that. Those things look good on a sort of resume, but they don't bring any sort of purpose or meaning to your life. And maybe you have to sort of figure out those things. Like, I got everything I ever wanted, to realize that everything I ever wanted wasn't what I wanted. And then, of course, I could hurl a bunch of cliches at you as well, right? Like, it's not the destination, it's the journey. And the thing about these platitudes is there is some profound wisdom in understanding that, yes, no matter where I go, if I'm not happy traveling there, I'm not going to reach some sort of perpetual bliss point. And so, any of these things that you just rattled off, they're sort of they're statistics, right? And statistics are inherently devoid of meaning. And so, and by the way, I don't think meaning sort of permeates the fabric of our universe. I think we get to create what is meaningful for us. And, my 9-year-old daughter finds things to be meaningful that are boring as hell for me. And but that doesn't mean that she's wrong. It just means that we find different things to be meaningful.
I love that. And that I'm curious who Kapil Gupta is and how that's played a role in some of these realizations.
Oh, wow. Yeah, Kapil Gupta he's a former medical doctor who is a philosopher now, a writer, and just a thinker. And I stumbled across him a few years ago. I was going through some significant health challenges, autoimmune disease that I have, and was tired of searching for solutions. And I read this book that he had called Direct Truth, and it really helped me understand that many of the solutions are actually the problem. They sort of cover up symptoms, both literally, but then also we have a lot of our culture is so obsessed with how-tos. How do I do this? And I think that stuff works really well for like mechanical things. If you want to learn how to declutter your closet, yes, there's a mechanical formula for that will help you declutter your closet. But that doesn't really do much for you if you don't know why you're doing what you're doing. anyone can go in and declutter their closet or improve their finances or whatever. But a month from now, a year from now, the closet's recluttered, the finances are out the window, you're back in debt, or, same thing with losing weight or becoming healthy or whatever it is. There are how-tos that can be helpful mechanically, but ultimately, if we don't understand the why behind the how, then it doesn't really do much for us long term. And so when I first started the whole minimalism thing, it wasn't about how to declutter your closet, right? It was much more about how might your life be better with less stuff, fewer obligations, less stress, less discontent. And what I realized is it wasn't really just about less. It was about making room for more, more time, more energy, more freedom, more peace. But those things aren't acquired. You can't go out and get more freedom. I can't go out and get more peace, right? It's already right here. And the same is true with happiness. Danny, I think that one of the most dangerous misnomers in our culture, and it's embedded in the fabric of even the founding documents of our country, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Well, that's actually the problem. The pursuit of happiness is the problem, because we're making ourselves miserable pursuing this thing we think it's going to make us happy. And there are these different sort of layers. It's like a layer cake of consumerism. At first, we think it's money. And then, okay, well, why do you want money? You can have $1 billion, but it's sitting in the bank. That doesn't make you happy. Well, why would it make you happy? I don't know. I guess I'll tell myself I'm allowed to be happy now. What a weird thing. But, okay, so maybe it's what money can get me. It's a luxury car. It's the big house with more bedrooms than people. It's got, whatever your idea of accumulation is, luxury clothes, designer clothes, a big walk-in closet full of stuff, and having all the sort of accoutrements. And then, of course, the average American household has 300,000 items in it now. Why? Because we think those things are going to make us happy. Well, it didn't when we got the first 100,000, so I guess I'll just double up, and now it's 200,000. It never happens, and the objects of our desire quickly become the objects of our discontent. All the things we thought were going to make us happy, bring us joy, they kind of do the opposite. They cover up that happiness that is innate within us. And so much of the work that I've done over the last 12 years is not about seeking the happiness or striving for happiness or success. It's been about subtracting to get to happiness or freedom or peace or whatever you want to call it. And what I learned is that it never comes through addition. Sure, if you're in some sort of crater, you have some, like I had a bunch of debt. Yes, we want to get out of debt because the debt is keeping us from being free. But at a certain point, more money isn't going to make, actually, it's never going to make us more happy. There are a million more examples of people who are billionaires who are miserable. And I remember when I first walked away from the corporate world back in 2011, and I took a 90% pay cut. I was making $23,000 a year that year. And not only was I more content that year, but I was strangely more financially secure that year as well, because I was no longer living beyond my means. Because I made really good money in the corporate world, but I spent even better money. So I was broke. I made great money, but I was broke. I didn't get any of the joy that I thought it was going to bring me. In fact, it brought me stress, overwhelm, anxiety, lots of anxiety, right? And then you try to cover that up with, okay, you know what the problem was? I bought all the things. They must not have been the right things. And so instead of one Lexus, I need two Lexuses. Or maybe it wasn't a Lexus, it's a Land Rover that I need. That's what's going to make me happy. And I want to be clear, Danny, I don't think there's anything wrong with those things. The problem is searching for joy in those things. Our material possessions can be great. I'm talking to you on a microphone right now. I'm using a computer. These things are tools that amplify or enhance our lives, and that's awesome. But if I think the thing by itself is going to somehow via osmosis upload contentment into me, then I'm just mistaken. And then you move up the layer cake there, and it's like, okay, the things didn't work, the money didn't work. Well, status, that will help me out. I'll have the right job title that I can impress people. And by the way, isn't that the first thing when you meet someone new, they ask you, oh, so what do you do, Danny? And we can have this little impressive answer, and I'm the director of operations for XYZ Corporation. Okay, fine. But really, when we ask that question, it's a dangerous question, because it's like, hey, where do you work? How much money do you make? So I can compare you to me somewhere on the socioeconomic ladder. And as soon as you phrase it that way, no one would ever ask the question that way. So instead we say, oh, what do you do? And I realized that part of my identity was not just tied up in my things and money, which I was broke, but I pretended I made a lot of money. It was also tied up in my identity. My identity that said, here's who I am. Here's the title on my business card. Of course, that's not who I am. What do you do? Well, I do a lot of things. I drink water. I type on a computer. I write books. I enjoy time with my 9-year-old daughter and spend every other Wednesday with my wife on a day date. Like, what do you mean, what do I do? Oh, how do I earn a paycheck? Nothing wrong with earning money. Nothing wrong with working for a company to pay the bills. But as soon as that defines us, no wonder we start to feel stuck. And it's just another layer of consumerism. And from there, it's all the things that you mentioned. And if I needed those things, I think there was a time, Danny, where, I don't know, a dozen years ago in my late 20s, I probably would have been like, oh, those things would be the best thing to have, right? And striving for them, I don't think I would have gotten any of them, because needing it becomes a type of prison in a way. Getting it and enjoying it is fine, but as soon as you need the accolade, if you need to be nominated for an Emmy, which was a beautiful accident. I thought the email when they nominated us was a prank. I thought someone was literally it was like some sort of phishing scam trying to get me to click on a link or something. And so, wow, nice. Okay, but what does it do? Does it fundamentally change my life? Do I actually get anything from it? And that you talked about Kapil Gupta earlier. That's one of the things that I learned from him is, like, what are you actually getting from any of these things that we tie up with our identity? And the truth is, you don't really get much from it. It looks nice on if someone wants to hire you to speak at their conference or something, maybe it helps with something like that, but it certainly doesn't help with joy, with inner peace.
Yeah. Well, what's really troubling, what I found, is how often we are all caught in these games without us even realizing it. And a good example might be when I was talking to someone and I was asking them what they're up to in their life, and they said they were in law school. And I was like, "Oh, that's awesome. Why do you want to be a lawyer?" And the kid looked at me and did not have an answer. And that blew my mind and freaked me out to understand that this person that I was talking to did not know why they were spending 3 years, potentially 20, 30, 40, 50 years of their life doing something, and they couldn't respond to that. So I guess my question is, how do we better get an understanding for questioning our own behavior and understanding why we're doing some of the things we're doing?
Yeah. I wish there was an actual how-to here. Like, Danny, you just do 17 jumping jacks, 14 push-ups, and then we get to whatever destination. But I think the answer that you had was actually in the question itself, the getting to the why. Yeah. Because the person you're talking about, that's every person. I mean, It's quite literally every person. We do things and we don't know why we do them, which is totally fine. This is not a moral judgment on that. I'm talking about myself. Anytime I make a judgment like this, it's merely a mirror reflecting my own sort of insecurities and deficiencies in my own life. And what I've realized is that we don't ask why because we're terrified of the answer we might get. It all unravels when you start asking a why. Because, by the way, we used to always ask why. It was beaten out of us culturally. When my daughter, when she was 2, 3, 4, 5 years old, every time she would ask a question, why? And I would give her the answer. And of course, that would simply produce another why. And all of the answers aren't found in actual answers. They're found in questions. And so what I really enjoy doing, instead of giving people answers, is answering. It's my favorite sort of pedagogical technique, is to answer a question with a question, sort of like a Zen koan, but maybe an updated version of that. And what that does is it allows us to explore something a bit deeper. What's beneath the surface? Because nothing wrong with going to law school. I know some pretty content lawyers. I know some really miserable ones as well. And the reason that someone would be miserable is either A, they didn't ask that why, or the why has changed for them over time. And I think something that I noticed is that, when I climbed the corporate ladder throughout my 20s, by age 27, I was the youngest director in my company's 140-year history. And I grew up really poor, and I thought, oh man, this is going to make me happy. Well, why? It's another type of consumerism. Consumerism is simply, it's the ideology that things are going to make us happy, or consuming is going to make us happy, or complete in some way. But of course, it never completes us. The job title doesn't complete us. And we never stop to say why. And pretty quickly, all of our assumptions about our identity start to break down. And so that list of so-called accomplishments that you read at the beginning of this conversation, if I felt like I needed those, in order to drop the attachment there, all I have to do is start to ask myself, why? Okay, why do you want that? And if there's a practical reason, it's because I really want to speak at this conference, and they only accept people who are a New York Times bestselling author. Okay, fine. Or if it's like, why do you want the college degree? Well, because I really want to be a medical doctor so I can help people with cleft palate surgeries, and the only way to do that is I have my medical degree. Okay, great answer. But generally, we don't have that answer. It's just, I don't know. Or at best, I had a really great sort of narrative overlay. Like I could tell you a story about why I was doing what I was doing, but I didn't know the actual why behind it. I'll tell you, there's one way to get to the why, though, and it's asking the question about benefits. A moment ago, we talked about how might your life be better with less, which is really a why question disguised as a how. And so, because I might have more financial freedom or more peace, or maybe just my house is cleaner, right? And so understanding the benefits of doing what you're doing. And so your friend who's becoming an attorney, what are the benefits of becoming an attorney? Well, I'll make really good money. Okay, great. What are you going to do with that money? Well, I don't know. I just want a lot of money. Okay, why? What are the benefits? And so getting down to what the benefits are for you. And by the way, it's highly individual, Danny. The benefits for me, for simplifying for me, are radically different for someone else. And that's okay. It's not about prescribing something that fits everyone. It's about understanding what is right for me, and that may not be right for we.
Yeah. And that's exactly, I'm so happy you brought that up, because that point illustrates that I was not trying to put him down for being a lawyer or trying to become an attorney. I just wanted to I was flabbergasted that we do things and we don't realize why we're doing it. And it highlighted that within myself as well. Yeah. Going to a different place, why was Grounding by Clinton Ober an impactful book for you?
Oh, yeah. So I've got this autoimmune disease, and I get really inflamed, especially in my ankles and joints. And I developed it about 5 years ago. And I would wake up in the morning with just intense pain. And then I realized that, I've tried a bunch of different things. And I heard about this guy, Clint Ober, who wrote a book called Earthing, and earthing.com is his website. And very rarely do I recommend anything, but I've received so much relief, and I got to a point where I just bought grounding. In fact, I've got a grounding pad here right at my desk right now, so you can see this little this guy here. I'm always grounded. I'm grounded 90% of the day now. So grounding is something that's, well, here's something really fascinating. So around 1960, we invented rubber sole shoes. And it's a beautiful thing. I had to have rubber sole shoes to be able to walk and run in them. I know I use them regularly, but the problem is we inadvertently disconnected ourselves from the earth. And so the earth has a negative charge that helps keep us in homeostasis. And without that negative charge, quite often we become inflamed. And so inadvertently, we have disconnected ourselves from the earth. And in that disconnection, we have created a lot of autoimmune conditions. And I'm not saying that that is the primary source of all autoimmune conditions, but I will tell you this, that a lot of people I know who have some sort of inflammation or autoimmunity have benefited greatly from grounding regularly. The best part about grounding is it's free. You can just go out into your backyard or a public park and stand barefoot for 15, 20, 30 minutes and experience the benefits of grounding. Although I'm doing it, like I said, 90+% of the day. I even sleep on a grounding mat at night, which is really helpful, but not just for me. My wife is a paragon of health. She's a dietitian and a nutritionist and probably the healthiest person I know, super fit. But even she benefited from sleeping on a grounding mat at night. She tracks her sleep like I do with a little Aura ring here, and her sleep radically improved. And then so once I saw that, all of our employees, I started finding ways to get them grounding pads and sleep when they're grounded. In our studio now, we have grounding mats on the floor and our chairs because I recognize the benefits. And I haven't seen everyone experience a great benefit from it, but more people than I would have expected. Yeah, 80+% of people who I see who are exposed to grounding see some sort of profound shift either in their sleep, any pain that they have, their recovery when they work out. It's just an amazing thing. So I'm no expert on grounding, but earthing.com, Clint is amazing. And his story is just, it's incredible. He was almost dead. And that happens quite a bit. You see a lot of people who are on death's door and they start grounding, and all of a sudden they begin to experience a type of cure or a significant amount of relief at least.
So let me just get this right. You say you do it 90% of your day, so that means you're outside 90% of your day, or the mat simulates? How does that work exactly?
Great question. So earthing or grounding, this mat like I have right here on my desk, I just keep it under my mouse pad, so my hand's on it all the time. So all the outlets in your home are grounded, right? And so you can plug it directly into a grounded outlet, which literally goes from a wire out to your yard or wherever, and there's just a copper stake in the ground that keeps it grounded, and it passes it through to a mat. So yes, I will spend quite a bit of time outside walking barefoot. And what's funny about Clint is, like, I've heard about grounding before him, but he seemed like a normal guy. And before that, whenever I saw people just walking around barefoot, I was like, oh, it was just judgmental of me. Look at these hippies. They don't know what they're doing. But then as soon as Clint started showing the science behind grounding, then my ego allowed me to accept the fact that, oh, okay, this is scientifically proven. Okay, now I'm allowed to be healed by it. It's absurd, I know, but I felt like I needed that scientific verification in order to accept it. And so, yeah, I do spend quite a bit of time outside, walking around barefoot. We've got a nice concrete patio in our backyard, which also is grounded. Any concrete is grounded, or just walking around in the grass is grounded. I got a great nature preserve up here in Ventura County that we walk through, and I'll just walk through barefoot. And my daughter spends 90% of her time walking barefoot as well. We unschool her, and so she just gets to spend all the time she wants outside. She almost never wears shoes, and it's the grounding mats are a great supplement for that. Yes, it does exactly the same thing as being out on the earth and grounded, but you can't do that always when you're inside. If you want to sit down on the couch and read a book, then yeah, I'll just have a grounding mat there, and so I'm grounded the whole time.
Super cool. You just mentioned you unschool your daughter. What does that mean?
Yeah, it's sort of like we take her to a place that actually used to be a school, so she doesn't go to school anymore. She's technically homeschooled, and we do a lot of learning with her at home. I was just doing some math work with her this morning, and some reading last night, and she actually describes it better than I can. So the place we take her, it is an old school building that this couple bought. And there's about 200 kids that do unschooling there, except it's an old school building, but there's no traditional schooling. And so when I asked her about it when she first started going there, she said, "You know, I said, well, what is the school like?" She said, "It's just like a regular school, except I don't have to do anything that I used to have to do in regular school." And so there are no classrooms, there are no teachers, there's no curriculum, there's no syllabus, there is no strict schedule. You don't have to be there at a certain time or on a certain day even. And yet it is a place for community to sort of gather and have some self-directed learning. So the kids all learn on their own. It's kind of like there was that book, Lord of the Flies, that we all had to read in school. And like these kids, all run wild on the island. It's kind of like Lord of the Flies, but with a few adult supervisors. And it turns out Lord of the Flies works really well as long as you have some mentors to supervise along the way. So there's all kinds of really cool things there. I mean, she's learning to do farming with goats and chickens and sheep and horses and then she's learning aerial yoga, and they have a small little recording studio in one of the former classrooms, and it's all self-directed. She gets to learn what she wants to learn. If she wants to learn music today or painting today or something about something that happened in history and learn about art, she gets the opportunity to do that. And I've found, I don't know about you, Danny, but with me, when I'm forced to learn something, I kind of, it makes me wince. But if I'm really compelled by something, I will dive deep into it. And that's really what the unschooling model is about. It's about allowing them to follow what is compelling to them and then devote themselves to that for as long as it's compelling. If it's no longer compelling, she can walk away and find something else that is compelling. But that's really how we learn, through full immersion.
I love that. So one of the things that you have to do as the host of a podcast and just as somebody who's in the world of writing and putting thoughts out there is consuming and taking things in. You've mentioned two people who have been impactful to you. Clint Ober and Kapil Gupta are two people who you were drawn to. How do you pick people to learn from? Because that part of life is perhaps the most important. If you get taken by the wrong person or the wrong place, maybe that's part of the learning process. But yeah. I think it's an important thing to think about. How do you choose the people to learn from?
Yeah, there's a couple old sayings there. There's no failure, there are only lessons, right? And so, yeah, you could go learn from the quote-unquote wrong person,
yeah,
and find out that it was the most right thing you could have done, right? It's like the old parable about the Chinese farmer who his horse ran away, and then his everyone in the town said, "Oh, it's awful," and then his son went out there. They came back the next day, and there were 8 horses there, right, with the horse, and everyone in the town was like, "Oh, this is awesome," right? And the farmer's like, "Yeah, maybe." And then the son breaks his leg on the horse, and everyone's like, "This is awful," and farmer's like, "Yeah, maybe," right?
Yeah.
And the next day, the conscription officers come into town to conscript him to fight in the next war. They can't take the son because, well, he broke his leg. And so everyone in the town is like, "Oh, thank God. Isn't that great that you're not going to take him?" And he says, "Well, maybe." And I think that happens with whenever we're learning, is like something that seems like it's really, really good for us might end up not producing the results we wanted, might be quote unquote bad for us. And it made me realize that the good and bad are societal constructs quite often, and something might be good in the moment, but when you pan out, it may not be very good for you at all, and vice versa. In terms of, to answer your question head on, I don't know. I think sometimes the things that really resonate with me, they show up at a particular time at which they can resonate. I remember reading Alan Watts' stuff back in my 20s, and it didn't resonate with me at all. But I picked it back up a couple of years ago, and all of a sudden it was like, oh, this information, he's been dead my entire life. And so this information hasn't changed. What has changed? I've changed. Now I'm more receptive to this. I'm ready for it. And it's funny, I'll meet people all the time in public. Someone will walk up to me and say, hey, your documentary or your book or your podcast found me right at the right time. As opposed to what? If I found you at the wrong time, you wouldn't be saying anything to me, right? And I think that is true, that yes, sometimes the teacher arrives only when the student is ready. And so when I'm ready for something, I might find it really compelling. And if I find it compelling, I tend to follow that thread, because I think discipline, and what other words will we use around discipline? Actually, we'll just start with discipline here. Discipline is sort of a misnomer in a way, because if I were to force myself to read Alan Watts all throughout my 20s and got nothing from it, then I had a lot of discipline, but I didn't get anything. What did it actually get me, right? And so quite often we're disciplined for all of the wrong things. We're taught that discipline is a premier virtue. Okay, fine, but I'd rather not use discipline. I'd rather find something that I'm really compelled by. Then I don't need any discipline at all. I write every day. I don't need any discipline for that. I am really compelled by writing. And so I get up and I do it because it's compelling for me. I teach a writing class. I never tell students that, if you hate writing, you should really just write more. That's crazy to me, right? And so discipline, it appears that I'm disciplined because I sit down and write every day, but I don't find it to be drudgery at all. I think it's different a little bit from resistance, and I want to be clear about that. There are days where it's like, oh yeah, it'd be easier for me to get on Instagram right now than to write. And so there's a little resistance there, but that resistance is sort of a compass. It points me toward the thing that I want to do. Every morning around 4:30, 5 in the morning, I get into an ice bath. We were fortunate enough to get one in our backyard, and I've been doing ice baths for about a decade. And I know it's the coolest trend now. I'm not doing it to be trendy. I just have this weird autoimmune thing, and I really have enjoyed the ice bath. But every single morning, I feel that resistance because it's 32 degrees, and my body is like, hey, you're dying. And so, of course, you're going to feel the resistance there. But as soon as I've finished doing it, I do about 3 minutes. Or if I'm writing, I write for at least an hour, 1 to 3 hours. As soon as I finish that, I'm never like, oh, I wish I wouldn't have done it. I wish I wouldn't have written for an hour. I wish I wouldn't have gotten the ice bath. I wish I wouldn't have gone to the gym. No, I find those things compelling, even if there's a little resistance up front. The only reason there's a little resistance up front is because, well, I know there are so many other things that I could pacify myself with. I can get on Twitter and waste 45 minutes without even knowing it, right? And so there's so many things I can do to sort of waste my time, and even that isn't a bad thing. Sometimes I will schedule wasted time. At least once a week, I'll schedule an hour of YouTube binging. And sometimes more than that, 2 or 3 times a week, quite often, I will schedule that. And so that I feel like, oh, yeah, this is what I want to be doing with this time. And if something more compelling pops up, I'll just take the YouTube binging off the calendar. But that way, I know, yes, I am wasting my time, but am I really wasting it if I find this a little compelling in the moment? But if I'm always just following the thread of what is convenient, of what is easy, because we confuse simple and easy, right? Because simple is like, yeah, an ice bath is pretty simple. No, it doesn't get much simpler than that. It's ice water and me, and that's it. Writing, it's me and a pen and a piece of paper, or me and a laptop and a blank page with a blinking cursor. That's pretty simple. But actually doing it every day is not easy. There's some resistance involved in that. And so for me, I don't look at discipline. I do look at resistance and say, oh, what is that pointing me toward? It's probably pointing me toward a more meaningful experience. I actually enjoy once I start doing the writing, and once I start doing even the ice bath, I enjoy doing it. So it doesn't feel like drudgery to me once I get through that initial bump of resistance.
How have you become better at looking at the thing that you are resisting and actually leaning towards it?
Yeah, I don't think about it. I mean, I think that's the curse that we have. I was listening to Eckhart Tolle. I'm not sure if you're familiar with his work, but he had this great little story that he told. He was at a party somewhere. I don't know if it was like in Saudi Arabia or something, and there was a David Blaine-esque figure there who was doing sort of illusionist magic tricks, and the person who was throwing the party had David Blaine, or whoever it was, get into this giant fish tank. It's probably the size of my home office here right now. This giant fish tank. And he got in there, and he held his breath for 7 minutes as he was looking at everyone at the party. Like, it was just a cool party trick, even though it'd be impossible for me or you to do without a lot of training, because we would drown, right? And so he sees the guy in there just sort of looking at everyone, and Eckhart's just watching it. And the owner of the guy who's throwing the party walks over to Eckhart and says, "Can you do that?" And Eckhart says, "Do what?" And he goes, "Can you stop breathing for 7 minutes?" And Eckhart goes, "No, but I can stop thinking for 7 minutes."
Mm.
And I think that's ultimately the key for me to getting past the resistance, because it's easy to ruminate about it. Because as soon as we start ruminating, I can make a million different excuses, right? Oh, I'll do it this afternoon. Oh, I'll just wait until tomorrow to do it, right? That's why I don't have a to-do list. I have a today list.
I love that.
And the reason I have a today list is because if I don't get it done today, then it's just not going to get done. There really is no tomorrow in many respects. I mean, yes, we can plan for something on a calendar or whatever, but that tomorrow doesn't exist. So what exists is right now. And I can think myself out of the moment. And that resistance forces me quite often to deal with those thoughts. And if I continue to follow the thoughts, I don't actually do the thing that I find to be meaningful. But when I start doing the thing that I find to be meaningful, I realize that, oh, wait a minute. This is an act of no mind. It's not thinking. Mm-hmm. And writing is the best example of that for me. But there are many other things that we do that put us in that flow state that make us feel as though we are the most alive. And it's because we get out of here and we actually get into our body.
It's beautiful. I love that. Can you speak a little bit about going on Saturdays without your phone? Because I think this is a little beneficial way we can get more into the no mind, is to spend some time without our little devices.
Yeah. My wife and I started this on, we call it Screenless Saturdays. And we just throw our phones in a drawer and go out for a while. And it really started for me about a decade ago. I went 2 months without a phone. You learn a whole lot about yourself and also your friends if you don't have a phone for a couple months. And I was just looking for something to write about, a little stoical experiment that could be fun for me to take on, right? And so as I did that, I learned that I have all of these impulses to twitch for the phone constantly, right? And so once a week, I try to remove that impulse. There are other ways that I remove it as well. The Screenless Saturday is a great way to do it because you might get lost. Without GPS, what am I going to do? I'll get lost. Okay, so what? What's the worst thing that can happen, right? I stop, and I've actually had to stop a few times and ask a gas station for directions. They look at you like you're crazy now, but because they're like, "Don't you have Google?" I'm like, "No, actually, I don't. I don't have a phone." And they're like, "Oh, okay." And it's really fascinating to people. But I try to find ways to do that in my life without depriving myself. The minimalism thing is not about deprivation. It's about simplifying in ways to make room for something more meaningful. So another thing that we do at our home here is with my phone and with my wife's phone, as soon as we come in the door, we have a little entryway with a shelf there. And we call it the entryway rule. As soon as we get home, our phone does not follow us around the house. Because that means what? Notifications can follow me around. It means everyone can follow me around the house in a way. And so if I need it, I still have access to it. It's over there in the entryway charging, and I can go over there. I can send a text. I can make a phone call. It's almost like having a corded phone once again, because I'll have to walk over there to check my messages. And of course, I do all the other things that all the productivity experts recommend, whether it's, I don't have social media on my phone, or I don't have email on my phone. Even though I have a regular iPhone, I have a smartphone. I'm not a Luddite. But the reason I don't have those things has nothing to do with the apps. It has to do with me. I find that I am compelled by impulsive things, and I think many of us are, right? And so if I just remove the thing from my pocket, if I remove the app from the phones, then I'm less compelled to fiddle around with it throughout the day.
You've built an incredible community of people who really resonate, obviously, with the message that you've put out for the past decade. And one of the things that I stumbled across in my research for doing this about why potentially that is the case is you and Josh notoriously greet fans with a hug, often enough that it have been labeled huggers by certain media outlets. Was there any thought behind this to embrace people, or is this just a natural thing that you guys did? If the research is correct, and you can't trust everything you read on the internet.
Yeah, I've hugged over 70,000 people now. Whenever we go out on a book tour, we will do some sort of hug line. We didn't do this during COVID, obviously, but throughout ever since 2011, we've been hugging people. I remember our very first tour stop was in 2011, and we had 8 people show up at that first event. And then a few years later, we had 2,000 people show up in Sydney, Australia, and we'd stick around and hug all of them as well. I mean, there are times I've stuck around till 2 a.m. hugging lines of people, and I think it just breaks down the barrier in a way that it gets right to our humanity. And you realize that quite often we don't touch each other anymore, especially post 2020.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand why. I was certainly terrified at first to I don't know anything about this, right? But even on our most recent tour, we do these things called Sunday symposiums in Los Angeles, and once a month or once a quarter, we just bring a small group of people, 200 people into a theater. And we always greet people with hugs. I'll go out into the crowd and before the event and hug people. I find it's a way to connect with someone right away. I mean, yeah, you can have a handshake or whatever. I always announce it, hey, I'm a hugger. I don't force hugs on anyone. But yeah, I find it's the way for us to connect immediately. If you want a quick way to connect with someone, it will throw them off too, because we're not used to doing it. And I think it makes everyone a little bit uncomfortable, including myself, because I feel uncomfortable making you uncomfortable. But I also recognize that discomfort is the place from which we grow.
I often find that there's such a difference between doing in-person interviews and doing them virtually. And you might find that as well. And one reason for that is that when you hug or when you're with somebody closer in connection, there is something that's happening. Have you given any thought to this, or like what's going on when we're physically versus virtually connected?
Yeah. I've done some reading on it, and it gets back to the grounding thing as well, but there is certainly a connection with the electromagnetic frequency of being in the same room with someone. In fact, you walk into a room sometimes and you'll know, the energy just feels off in here. And I know I feel real woo-woo-y even saying that. I'm allergic to woo-woo nonsense. But you feel it. And there's no denying, and I don't know what it is. I mean, there's pulse electromagnetic frequencies that the earth emits, and I totally get that, and I know you can prove those things with science, but who cares? Set that aside. How does it make you feel? And you're right. I'm doing this with you remotely. I almost never do remote conversations like this. I generally prefer to do something in person whenever we can. But I wanted to honor this commitment with you, and I was certainly willing to chat with you. But yeah, whenever we can do the things in person, it's just so much more electric. You feel it. And in fact, with the Minimalist podcast, I think we've done maybe 2 remote interviews ever, and Kapil Gupta was one of them, and it's just because he doesn't travel, he doesn't appear on camera, and so and he's had the most profound effect on the way that I think and the way that I don't hold on to beliefs. So it made sense to do something remote with him, but by and large, and we have people all the time who I'd love to have on the show, but they just aren't in LA, and so we just don't have them on the show because we don't like. You lose something when it's remote.
You mentioned the piece of feeling like you're allergic to the woo-woo, and the scientific is so near and dear to your heart. But you also said that feeling is such an important piece of life and how you feel about doing certain things. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious how you've been able to get closer to the feeling part or the less rational brain when it seems like that's the part that you were raised in or that you grew up listening to.
Yeah. The once I realized the intellect wasn't really working for me anymore, right? Like I could try to be smart or try to have an intellectual understanding, but that doesn't really do much for you. What works is having a deep visceral understanding. You call it, in your body or your heart, but like it's almost as though you understand something down to your bone marrow. It's so much better than having the knowledge of something. There's a whole lot of knowledge and facts on Wikipedia, but it's generally not very interesting. You don't print out pages from Wikipedia and take them to the beach to read. You take a book that makes you feel something.
That's a line that's going to stay with me. That's so true. And especially in a world that you're seeing the rise of artificial intelligence and ChatGPT, and it's like that. How does a writer think about that in you, who's so deep into how we feel and how humans can create? What's your perspective on artificial intelligence and the rise of internet writing?
Yeah, I think it's all pretty overblown. You're not going to see in my lifetime, at least, anything that mimics the heart of a beautiful novel. I mean, to me, the novel is still my favorite art form. I think it's up there with albums. I'd put albums on that list. But to me, there's something about the heart, the way that it makes you feel. There's a particular truth in a novel that you don't find in a self-help book. There are a lot of facts in self-help books, not a whole lot of heart-level truth in self-help books. But you can find beautiful, beautiful truths in a Jonathan Franzen novel or Lori Moore short story in a way that I can't find in a blog post or on just a random book about how to improve my life.
I've been seeing more and more of this trend personally, where I have friends who are nonfiction writers and great ones at that, but I see them moving towards the fiction realm. And it makes me so excited because I've never been a fiction reader, but maybe they're my entry point into really taking it seriously. I know that a lot of nonfiction readers listen to this podcast as well, me being one of them. What are some fiction books you would recommend starting with, or fiction works that could really grasp us and help us understand the medium that you love so dearly?
Yeah, I don't make it a habit to recommend books. I'll tell you books that have really resonated with me, though, and I'll tell you why. Anything by Jonathan Franzen, he's a master, but his most recent book called Crossroads is, if you want to really get a deep understanding of the interiority of a human being, and also of the family dynamics, great book. Another book he wrote called Freedom, which is also a book about families. He's sort of the novelist who has mined the same sort of family landscape, but he does so in a way where you see every ugly part of yourself in his characters. And whenever I see criticisms about his books, it's almost like, oh, I just didn't like the characters. And it's like, yeah, I didn't like the characters because I see the ugly parts of me in those characters, the judgmental parts, the unforgiving parts, the misbehaving parts, the lying parts, the cheating, whatever it is, you see yourself in these people. And even if you're like, I could never behave like that. Okay, no, I haven't behaved like that, but there is some world in which I could. And so it illuminates these truths. There's been some really great books recently I've read. Emily Gould had a book called Friendship, which is about a group of young women in their late 20s who are sort of going through a bit of an identity crisis. So if any of your listeners are in their late 20s, especially, I found it I found it on a random shelf at a coffee shop, and I started reading it, and it drew me in. And here's an exercise that I do regularly. And so here's how I find novels to draw me in. And I teach my writing students this as well. So I call it narrative urgency. And I'll take my wife or a friend, and we'll go to a bookstore, and we have these book battles. And all I'll do is we'll each grab a book off the shelf, and we read the first line. Because the point of a first line of a book is simple. It's to get you to read the second line. That's it. And the point of the second line is to get you to read the third line. And so when you are compelled enough by the first line, it carries you forward to the second. And if that's compelling, it keeps carrying you forward. And before you know it, you're 8, 10, 20 pages in, and now you're engrossed in the story and you're loving the characters. And so that's what I'll often do. And I found so many books, even recently. I read a novel by Catherine Lacey called The Answers. Oh, beautiful, beautiful novel about illness. And sort of trying to understand, we're always looking for answers, but quite often the answers end up getting us into more trouble, right? And so there are profound truths in these novels that you just can't find in a self-help book.
Why?
And I say that as a person who writes self-help books. So
Yeah.
it's not a judgment. It's simply that
Totally.
I started out writing fiction, and my first book was actually a novel, but the things that people know me for are nonfiction books.
Yeah, well, your first book that I believe you ever read was a pop thrash thriller at age 21.
Yeah, I hated reading as a kid, and I started reading as an escape in my early 20s, and then I started finding in some of the classics, Great Gatsby, and some other books that were more literary, and I fell in love with the sort of the narrative urgency, but also there's this exchange of consciousness that novels have that no other medium has, by the way. So if you have a writer who's been dead for 50 years, but you're still having this exchange of consciousness with them, I get to pick up and get into their head, or their head gets into mine in a way. And then also you get into the minds of the characters, which are just a subset of getting into the mind of the author in a way. And there's something about that. It's like getting into the interior of a person, and you can't even do that with a conversation.
Yeah. What fiction writers can do when it really grips you is incredible. I'm curious about writing in general. What are some of the common things you see, not starting writers, but writers who have been writing for, let's say, 3 to 5 years? What are some of the mistakes you see people make in that realm?
Yeah, aspiring is the biggest
writers.
thing. Yeah, that was my problem, right? I was an aspiring writer for a long time, so I did a whole lot of aspiring, but not a whole lot of writing, right? I don't care about the noun to be a writer. Like, what the hell does that mean? We're all writers.
Yes.
You sent me an email today. That's being a writer. So we're all writers. Let's take that off the table. We're all writers. But people who are truly compelled by writing, they write. So it's not about the noun to me, the writer. It's about the writing, the verb. I want to write as a writer. And so I find the process really enjoyable once I get past that initial resistance. The first 15, 20, 22 minutes of writing, staring at that blank page, that blinking cursor, at first there's some resistance there, right? I don't really believe in writer's block so much as distraction. And so, because I'm not worried about word count, I'm not worried about page count. I'm just worried about the 4 words that changed my life were sit in the chair.
Mm.
There's a author named Donald Ray Pollock. He a super talented novelist. He has the best story. He was 55 years old, working at a paper mill in Chillicothe, Ohio. I'm from Dayton, Ohio, and so he really loved fiction and read fiction his whole life and always wanted to write but never did. He was an aspiring writer. He worked at the Mead paper mill in Chillicothe, and oh man, he just had a normal factory worker life. He had worked there since he was 18, and he went to his wife one day and said, "Hey, I want to try this writing thing." She's like, "Okay, well, we've saved enough money in our emergency fund. Why don't you give it 2 years, see what happens?" And he wrote his first short story collection, a great collection called Knock 'em Stiff. And he wrote a novel called The Devil All the Time, which is now a movie on Netflix. He actually narrates the movie on Netflix. Great movie, even better book, phenomenal book, The Devil All the Time. Haunting, still stays with me. And I took him out to lunch once. We were in Ohio. I was maybe 29 at the time. And I had been writing for a while, but I was aspiring mostly. And I wrote semi-regularly. And I said, what did you learn that made you start writing every day? He goes, well, just sit in the chair. I don't worry about page count, word count. I just sit in the chair for 3 hours a day, every day. Now, metaphorically, you could be at a standing desk too. That's totally fine. But like, no distractions. Sit in the chair. No internet connection. No checking the phone. No, I forgot I got to wash the dishes. That was my biggest thing, Danny. I would have quite often a checklist of 14 different things I need to do, and then I'll start writing. And I do 12 of them, but there was always something else that pops up on the to-do list. But now my only rule is I have to wake up. That's it. I wake up and I will start writing. I tend to take the ice bath first, and that'll just wake me up for real. And then I just start writing, and I'll do that for an hour, and sometimes it's just an hour, and then I'm done. I've sat in the chair for the day. It's never more than 3 hours unless I'm working on a deadline for a book or something. But it's about just getting the words onto the page. And the reason I don't worry about word count is some of my best writing days are negative 2,000 words. They're the editing days, right? And so it's actually the subtraction that makes the writing more meaningful. And so that's why I'm less worried about that. I spend also, here's one other thing. I spend about 2/3 of my time editing and 1/3 of my time composing. So actually getting the words onto the page. I call it jam session writing. Just like you're getting all these words out there. It's going to be crap. It looks incoherent. That's fine. It's just getting the words onto the page. And the other 2/3 of the time, it's panning for gold. To mix my metaphors here, but you're panning for gold. There's a lot of sediment on the page now, and I'm just trying to find the gold that's already there.
Well, this conversation was certainly gold, and I'm so grateful for you for having it. I like to end these podcasts with a challenge, or I like to ask the guest for a challenge to describe or to place some action that people should take after they consume the great conversation we just had. I'm so grateful for having it. And now, what's a challenge we can leave people with to take the next action in their day? Yeah. Does anything come to mind for you?
For me, it's always about letting go. But letting go is not something that you do. Letting go is something you stop doing, right? And so letting go involves the stopping of the clinging. Clinging to stuff, obviously, that's getting in the way. Not all stuff. I'm not an ascetic, but if I'm clinging to something, if I'm holding onto it too tightly, I can't even enjoy it. So it starts with loosening my grip, and then I cease the clinging. And if it's no longer serving me, it's easy to let go once I've stopped clinging. But I think that also applies to other areas of our life. Letting go of unnecessary obligations. Busy is the worst 4-letter word in the English language, right? Because we use it as a status symbol. Oh, what have you been up to lately, Danny? Oh, yeah, I'm just so busy right now, right? And it's like, as soon as I say that, what I'm really saying is my life's out of control. Mm-hmm. Everyone else's emergency has now become my emergency. That's why I'm so busy, because my calendar is full and my hands are moving all the time, but I'm not focused on anything. And so letting go of the necessary commitments, obligations, etc., that don't serve me anymore. Maybe they even served me at a time. Also, letting go of toxic relationships. It's not about doing anything. It's about no longer clinging to anything that's not serving us. And that is true with activities, with social media, whatever it might be. There's nothing inherently wrong with these things. The problem is when we cling. Because if you cling to anything, eventually you're going to get dragged.
Joshua Fields Millburn, thank you so much for your time. I'm so grateful for you. This lived up to my expectations and then some. Where can people find you to connect with you further if they're not already connected to the Minimalist in some capacity?
Sure, they could find us. Just theminimalists.com. Everything's over there. Podcast, etc., etc.
Perfect.